If any of you have been to the Chicago Bean, you know that there is people there all the time, day or night, doesn't matter, all the time. There are just tons of people walking around. So if you are, if you're one of those people who's trying to make an image with no people in them, one of the ways to do that is by using a longer shutter speed. So you can see in the top, I think I put it in the top corner, I might have, this was shot at f16 so that I could not only get everything in my foreground and background in focus, but that I could create longer shutter speeds. This was shot at 15 seconds so that all the people that were out there, which I'd say there was probably about a dozen people or so walking around, if not more, as they walk through my frame with 15 seconds, they're keeping their pace and I don't see them. You can see though, right underneath, there is another gentleman standing under there. He was another photographer that was out shooting that night. And I kept him in there on purpose. Him and I had a conversation before we started shooting, and I knew where he wanted to shoot. He knew where I wanted to shoot. And I asked if he was under there, if he just wouldn't mind standing still, right? So with him standing still, I was able to keep him perfectly in focus. And it gave my Chicago Bean there even more scale. So we have the buildings in the background, but it gave the bean a bit more scale to show that a human can still stand under there and how big it actually is. You can also see off to the right that there's a little bit of a ghosted person walking around, and I kept that as well. You know, just adds to, I think they add to my scene, keeping a little bit of movement, a little bit of structure and human beings out there. There are the presence of people everywhere we go, and I know that we want to be the tourist when we go to the Grand Canyon that's the only person there, and I hate to break it to you, it's never going to happen. But with scenes, with knowing our shutter speeds and things like this, we can kind of prevent some of that from happening. So I hope that helps a little bit. Back to our shutter speeds a little bit. The other was shot at 15 seconds. This was shot at 30 seconds, just to show you the ability that my shutter can have really late at night. Again, I told you we're going to get into our exposure times and compensation and all that in just a second. So I won't break that news just yet. But keep in mind, we can also keep our shutters open for really long periods of time. You can technically keep your shutter open as long as your battery will allow you. If you have a battery that's going to last you 6 hours and you want to do a 6-hour exposure, go for it. As long as you have that equation set, you can keep your shutter open as long as you want. In this particular case, I had judged the background, the car that was driving through. I tested out a few cars before this one, knowing that it took them exactly 3 minutes from the corner of that rock in the back of my frame to exit my frame over to the left. So I tested a few out for 3 minutes, and I knew that I wanted to see the entire car go, the car go through my entire frame. So for my last frame, I used 3 minutes as my base of my shutter speed, and then I adjusted my aperture and ISO accordingly. To still get that kind of starbursted moon effect in the top and a little bit of streak from the stars in the back. So it worked out that the 3 minutes was just spot on. All right, so I promised you guys some information on your night skies, so we will get into that now. You are totally welcome to take a screenshot of this if you like, or to write some of them down. I think these have really helped me when I am out in the wild trying to do my night skies. They're all things that I've kind of picked up over time that I hope might prevent you guys from having to go through the same things I did to figure them out. First off, we're going to talk about setting your lens and setting your focus. If you're all out there shooting the night sky, I strongly recommend to put your lens into manual focus. Reason being is your camera focuses based on contrast. So if your camera can't find anything to focus on, it's just going to hunt. It's going to hunt every single time. So my best suggestion on how to do this: put your lens into manual focus. Turn on your live view on your LCD screen in the back of your camera. digitally zoom in to the brightest star or the brightest planet, whatever you see out there that's the brightest. Digitally zoom in, not manually, but digitally on the back of your LCD screen. Zoom in, and then use your lens to manually focus. You'll see less haze around that star or that planet that you're focusing on. And it does take a little bit of time, so it won't come right to you right away, but take your time with this. Manually focus with your lens, and then tape your, if you have a little bit of gaffer tape, tape your lens down. If you tape it down, you won't have to move it for the rest of the night. And then you can digitally zoom back out on your LCD screen, and you won't have to worry about refocusing for the rest of the evening, as long as you're still doing night sky stuff. A lot of our lenses will have a little view window on the top of them with an infinity symbol. It looks like kind of two elongated circles there. Our infinity symbol sometimes can be spot on our lenses, and other times it's closer to one side of that infinity symbol or not. So if we know our lens already, I know that I have 2 lenses that I go out there and do night sky photography with a lot, so I know exactly where their point of focus is. One of them is very, very close to the middle of the infinity symbol, just off to the left, and the other is actually way off, closer to the beginning of the infinity symbol. So because I've used them so much, I know that, and then I just go right in, tape it down, and have no problem. But you really need to study your lens in order to just kind of get it where you want for all of your future shooting. If you haven't done that yet, that tip that I just gave you for focusing is the best way, I think, to do it. Next up is having a shutter release. A shutter release is a cable that you can connect directly to your camera. Some of them are wireless, so some of them don't direct connect, but it is literally a shutter release that you will push the button and it will push the shutter for you, so that you don't worry about any extra shake when you are pushing your shutter. Even if your camera is set up on a tripod, ready to shoot the night sky, every time you hit your shutter, there's the possibility of added extra shake. So having a shutter release eliminates a lot of that. If you don't have a shutter release, you can use your timer. A lot of your DSLRs will have either a 2-second or a 10-second timer, so that when you put it on that, you hit the shutter, no problem, the camera settles down after 2 seconds, and your image will have less availability to shake. So I do suggest that. Next up, turning off your VC, vibration compensation. In Tamron land, it's VC, vibration compensation. In Nikon land and in Canon land, you'll have VR or IS. Others have OS, so there are different designations for that. But regardless, whatever lens you're using, I suggest if you're set up on a tripod, doing night sky, long exposure photography, turn off your VC. The VC is a motor inside of your lens. If you leave that motor on, there's always possibilities of extra shake, because the motor is physically hunting. It's trying to find the shake that normally when we are handheld, we need. We turn that VC on when we're handheld because it helps us it helps us stop our frame at slower shutter speeds. But it works against us a lot of times when we're set up on a tripod. So make sure that that's turned off. Next up, which is one of the hardest for me, be patient. Think before you shoot. I fully admit that I'm not the most patient person on the planet. I'm getting better, but still not perfect. Really do your research and think before you get out there about what you're going to be photographing. And when you get behind your camera, take your time with the images that you're trying to create. When you go home with 700 images, it doesn't matter that you have 700 images unless you got the one that you really, really like. So be patient trying to get that one image that you really like, because I guarantee you're not sharing all 700 of them. You're just going to be sharing one. You're just going to be really proud of that one. So make sure that you're patient enough to get that one. Next up, have everything you need in a handy pocket. When I go out and do our night sky national park workshops, I wear these like giant cargo pants that have like 15 pockets in them, so that I can have everything in my pockets. I can have my shutter release, I can have my extra filters, I can have whatever I need close at hand, so that I'm not digging around in my bag in the dark. While that seems like a very simple tip, everyone forgets it. So I suggest that when you are out there, have easy access to everything, not only so that you're not, wasting time digging through your bag, but depending on where you are, you don't want any extra critters living inside of your bag that you take home with you. Or if you're in Great Sand Dunes National Park, you don't want to bring piles of sand home with you and get that inside your gear. So I suggest to keep everything close. Now on the bottom there, you're going to see some tips for white balance, and we're going to get into our exposure next. But for white balance, I strongly suggest these are just, again, guidelines, not rules based on the sensor of your camera. But when photographing the Milky Way, I suggest 3900 Kelvin, moonlight 3000 Kelvin, and dark sky about 3200 Kelvin or tungsten. Again, just guidelines, not rules. They will be a little bit different based on the sensor of your camera and the color that it kind of puts off. But these are starting points for you. If not, auto ISO can generally work just fine. And then there are some kind of techniques you can use in post to help you control all of those colors. I don't normally say that though, because I want everybody to get their images right off the bat instead of trying to create later on in post. You will spend a lot of time trying to fix stuff in post later. So it's better that we try and get our images correct right off the bat. So I did promise you guys some guidelines to our exposure. Now you'll notice at the bottom there where it says try starting here at f2.8, ISO 3200 and 30 seconds. This is if we want to pin these equations that we see in here, are if we want to pinpoint the stars, if we want to freeze that motion. So you'll see 500 divided by the focal length, which equals our exposure time. And the examples underneath, let's say if I'm shooting out there with my 15 to 30 millimeter lens and I'm super wide at 15, that gives me about a 33-second exposure time. So I set my shutter speed to about 30 seconds. Now underneath it, you'll see 20 millimeter lens and 24 millimeter lens. And on the right, you'll see those seconds, that exposure time getting shorter. The reason that is because we're actually getting closer to the movement. Sounds kind of silly, but we're getting closer to the stars. Not physically, but with our lens we are, and the closer we get to the stars, the more we pick up our motion. Because we're rotating, if we, let's say for extreme purposes, we shoot on a 70 to 200 and we have a 200 millimeter lens, okay? So we're shooting all the way at 200. If I leave my exposure open for 30 seconds, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're going to see the movement of the stars, you're gonna see that star streak all the way through your frame. Again, nothing wrong with that. I do just have a suggestion though. If you are shooting, if you're doing long exposures at night, either pinpoint your stars or do really long exposures so that you can see the full star kind of streak all the way through the sky. Because sometimes with just that little blip, sometimes it makes it look like a mistake unless you have a good chunk of it in there. So practice one or the other and then determine right in the middle kind of how long you like your exposure to be. The other way you can actually do that is by stacking your images. So I'll have a lot of people create these really beautiful long exposures where you see the stars streak throughout the entire frame. And they maybe haven't done that by a 2-hour exposure, but they've done that by taking a single image every 30 seconds and then stacking it together later on in software. The only software that I've used for that is StarStax. And I do find that it does work just fine. You have to compress your images beforehand, so you can only use JPEGs. I believe you can't shoot in RAW unless they've done any sort of updating to it. But that's a pretty good way to do it. That way, let's say you've taken 100 exposures and they're great, but the next one, for some reason, I don't know, a raccoon ran by and knocked your tripod a little bit, right? You haven't just then missed your entire hour-long worth of images, but you've only missed that one 30-second shot, so you won't see too much of a blip in there. So I do think that's a good way to do it too. Now, when talking about our night skies, I don't want us to forget all of the things that we just talked about when it comes to composition. I know that when you're out there photographing the Milky Way and these beautiful skies, if you haven't done it before, and the first time you see the Milky Way on the back of your screen, it is awesome. It is a really great feeling to know that you captured the beautiful sky on the back of your screen. But once you get that first shot and you kind of get those excitement jitters out, don't forget to keep your landscape in there. Give your Milky Way some sort of base, some sort of, keep some sort of shape to it. That way you don't lose the weight of your image and people actually know what they're looking at, right? So we talked about composition, and we talked about, I kind of call them the puzzle pieces to our frame, our focal point, our leading lines, perspective and angles, all of these things that may sound like, again, we're overthinking our frame. But a lot of times we are doing it subconsciously. And in the Milky Way specifically, think about the time of year that you're going out to photograph it, because based on the time of year, it's going to show up in a very different shape. It could be straight across, it could be coming in at an angle down to your left, or it could be coming straight up and down. So there's lots of different angles that it will come in at, and you want to make sure that it has a base, that it has a landing point for it to go, because not only will it give it that base and that structure, but it will, just like we talked about in our composition, it will give us scale. It will show how massive this thing actually is, because people can relate to what they see in their foreground as their base. Okay. So a couple of last tips here for your night sky shooting. First off, have extra batteries. It will be a huge bummer if you get out into shooting your night sky and your battery dies 5 images in, especially when you're out there at night and it's really cold. Have extra batteries and put them in a pocket that's really close to you. Keeping them in a pocket will keep them warm. A lot of times batteries will die quicker if they're cold, so you'll always have one on hand just in case. Next up, have extra memory cards. I know that memory cards now can fit like a bazillion cards, right? But there's always that chance that a card can defect, a card can go wrong, right? Or we can lose a card, or something can happen, right? We always want to make sure that we have an extra card with us, because not only do we want to make sure we can continue taking extra images if we need them, but that we don't forfeit all the current images that we've taken on that card if the card does corrupt. So have extra ones with you just in case. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to click that yet. Back to the original screen. So tripod, we talked about tripod and why you need that. Like I said, not only do you need it for stabilization to make sure that you are completely stable, but that you can control your composition, so that you're not worried about what's going on to the left and to the right. You're not worried about having to kind of succumb to the wilderness out there. You can control all of that. Cable release, we talked about keeping a cable release with you. If not, having you use your timer, right? Your 2-second or your 10-second timer. That way you don't put any extra pressure on your camera. Having water and snacks is a big one. I don't know about you guys, but I get hangry when I'm out there and it's the middle of the night and all I want to do is eat. So have something with you just in case, so you don't have to run back to the car and get stuff. Glow sticks was one I actually recently learned from my boss, which I thought was an incredible tip. If you are in a place that you haven't been before, that you're not really well versed in, that you haven't spent much time, either putting glow sticks at the spot where you entered, or leaving a trail of glow sticks so that you can find your way out properly, especially if you're out there alone, is a great little trick. They're not going to really affect your images much, especially if you keep them a little bit further away. But that way you have a safe way in and out. Lastly, layers. I know that when we do our night sky national parks in the summers, a lot of time it is warm during the day and really chilly at night. Well, at least for me, because I'm a big baby and I hate the cold. So always have extra gloves, warm socks, a hat, good sneakers. Make sure that you are just ready to be out there. You don't want to have to worry about all this extra stuff while you're trying to create good images. The whole point of us being out there is to create good images. So let's kind of make sure all the other stuff is taken care of before we get out there and have to worry about it. So with that, This is me. You can find me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram as Tamron Tech Erica. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you just want to follow along on the journey, go for it. The only time I really can't be available is when I'm in the middle of the woods and I have no service. So other than that, I'm happy to help. With that, I'm going to see if I can jump back in here and get some of these questions and see if Troy and Steve have anything they want to add. So I will unmute. Oh, you guys are unmuted. Sweet. So I'll unmute you guys. I will stop share, see if I can find your questions. Let's see. Chat. Here we go. I'm going to go back to the beginning. Do you use red light? Do you use red light or a flashlight? Okay, so it depends. But if I am there, I'll use my red light on my oh my goodness, what's it called? My headlamp. There we go. I'll use my my red on my headlamp so that I don't have to. It's easier to readjust my eyes every time. But if I'm doing a little bit of light painting, I want to make sure that I have a flashlight that has kind of a neutral tone, and that I'm not worried about any of that extra kind of red mess that's going on out there. So if I'm just looking at the settings that are on the back of my camera, I use the red light. But if I'm light painting, I use a neutral light.
Erica, could you
Yes.
just sort of define for some people here what you mean by light painting in case they're unaware?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't get into light painting today just because I can kind of go deep into that. But light painting is when we want to add a little bit of extra exposure to our foreground, to our frame. So let's say I'll actually share my screen again and I'll pull up an image.
I had seen an image or two there where I thought you had probably added some light into there. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, let me.
Yep, that's the picture right there.
Yeah, I'm trying to play it and this won't go away. There we go. Can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so if we're talking about light painting is when we want to add a little bit of extra light to our frame, any part of that, mostly our foreground in this type of case. But if you look over to the right, you see a little bit of added light there, and that is done with a flashlight. Now, all flashlights give off different power. You're going to have different lumens. So you'll have flashlights that can throw out an unbelievable amount of power, and then some that just throw out a little bit. And no matter how many times you light paint that same scene, I guarantee that it's going to be different every single time. Even if you think you've thrown out the same amount of light or you think you moved your hand in the right direction, but you're literally taking a flashlight and you're painting in the areas that you want to add extra light. Have patience with it. It will be very, very different every single time you do it. Sometimes you'll end up with little hot spots here and there. Sometimes you'll end up with not enough light or too much light in one section and not on the other. So be patient with it. But believe it or not, you most likely need a lot less light than you think you do. If you take your flashlight out and you keep it streaking over the same spot for the entire 30 seconds that your shutter's open, you're going to see a giant hot spot. So practice the first couple of times that you're out there. Don't get frustrated with it. That's all it is. You're just painting in with your flashlight.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah. All right, let me get back to those questions. Has StarStax come out with a PC version or is it still for Mac? Okay, so I have someone asking about StarStax, if it's come out with a PC version or just for Mac. Honestly, I don't know. I've only used it for a Mac. I'm sure if I can try and pull up the website and see if StarStax will come up. Let's see here. StarStax. Let's see if it will. Multi-platform software. Bear with me, I'm looking for you. Download and installation. Okay, so it's either for Mac OS X version, or there is a Windows version for Windows 7 or higher. So yes, to answer your question, Windows 7 or higher. All right, is it better to have a red light? We talked about red light, so I hope that answers your question.
Can I just intrude for a moment here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, regarding the questions that we see, Christine, could you elaborate on your question about focal length calculations and, Micro Four Thirds mirrorless cameras? I'm kind of wondering where you were going with that fully, or what your concerns were. Thank you, Christine.
Can I talk?
There you go.
There you are.
All right. Well, I just, with the Olympus lenses, with the two, the difference in the crop factor, I just wondered whether the calculation had to take that into consideration. But it looked like Linda Krugman answered that question. I
Yeah,
think.
Linda. So yes, you do have to take that into account, because that number is the millimeter length that you are seeing the stars at. That's how close you are to the stars, basically. So even though, let's say our lens says 12, but it's really 24, our 24 millimeter is where we want to base that equation at. So yeah, Linda's got it right.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And thank you, Christine, again.
Christina, I'm also an Olympus shooter, but it's easier to do it ×2 than it was when I had my Canon ×1.6. So just multiply whatever your focal length is by 2 and then stick it in the equation.
Very cool. Thank you, Linda. Erica, I want to throw in a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Throw in a question to you as well. I know some of the people that we've had at the store have talked about specifically not just night sky photography, but specifically moon photography. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that in general.
On moon photography, yeah. So the moon is one of those kind of complicated things to shoot, right? You have a really dark sky, and then you have this really bright orb that's out in that sky. But we always have to expose for our highlight. We have to expose for the brightest thing that's in our frame, because if we overexpose for that, we're then losing all of the detail. We're losing all the information that's there. So depending on kind of what your scene is, you really have to pick and choose on what you want exposed for, right? So a lot of times when you see images that are, the perfect giant moon in this beautiful landscape, it's because they did two or three different shots, because they composed them later on. They photographed specifically for the moon in one frame, and then they photographed for the landscape in the next frame, and they merged them together. Kind of like what people do with HDR, right? Where they take multiple different frames at different exposures. So they take one at kind of a middle neutral exposure, then they overexpose by a stop, overexpose by 2 stops, and they go back down the other end. They underexpose for a stop, underexpose by 2 stops, and they squish them together, what's called HDR, high dynamic range, right? So our images that are merged. It's the same kind of thing with images that you see for the moon, where they're just taking multiple exposures. They're taking an exposure that is for the moon, and then another exposure that is for the landscape, and then compositing those together.
Okay. Alternatively, if someone did not want to do a multiple exposure composite image, I mean, could we just tell them, hey, shoot raw, again, expose for your highlights, but shoot raw, and then, get your highlight and shadow detail where you want when you process the image? Would that work also?
Yes, it just depends on the sensor then. So it depends on the quality of the capability of your sensor. For your I would still suggest to expose for your highlight in that type of situation, right? So it's easier to pull back from shadows than it is by highlight. So if we overexpose our highlight, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to pull back the detail out of that. Versus if you do expose for your highlight and you keep those tones in there, you can pull back a lot more detail from your shadows than you can from your highlight.
Okay. Thank you very, very much.
That can work, just depends on your sensor.
Right. Cool. What is the next question we got there? Another one about the red light and the glow sticks, looks like.
Yep, saw that too.
Do you have any feedback to that there? Regarding, do you ever accidentally get extra light in your exposure?
Oh yeah, I mean, sorry, I thought I answered that one earlier. Sorry. Yeah, so I mean, I use my red light when I am out, just if I'm checking the settings on the back of my camera or just wandering around. That way, it's easier for my eyes to correct themselves afterwards. And I only use my actual flashlight if I am doing light painting. I turn off any red light or green light, any extra light that I have when I actually am exposing for my image, because I don't want that extra light out there. So I make sure that that is off.
I know that we do sometimes see cameras that come with like that little shield that you can put over the viewfinder
Mhm.
to not allow light to even come in through that. Do you see that as being necessary? I mean, I know it's there, so it must have some use, but I've never used such a thing myself.
So I mean, I've never needed it for just 30-second exposures. If you are doing really long, hour, 2 hour exposures, if you're doing the long exposures, it is to eliminate any sort of extra light that can kind of leak in. So yeah, you can kind of shield that down a little bit. A lot of times it's built into your camera, so you can just flip the little switch on the side, and it will take away any sort of light leak that can add in. But that's it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Erica,
Cool.
there's one last question there about night photography, an application that uses higher millimeter zoom lenses like a 200 or a 500.
Say that again, Steve. Sorry.
There's a question from John. Says, is there a night photography application that uses a higher millimeter zoom lens, say 200 or a 500?
Oh, that like you would need a higher millimeter for? Um, That's a good question.
Moon, maybe?
The moon is the only thing I can really think of. I mean, unless you're just getting super creative with what you're trying to photograph. So if you are doing kind of long distance landscapes with your moon in the background or something really late at night, um, your lens is your lens is a tool. Your lens is a piece of glass, right? And your lens just helps you create what you want to create. Your lens doesn't control anything. You control the lens. So if you are just trying to get creative with stuff, you can use your lens for absolutely anything you want to use it for. I've shot a hummingbird with an 85 millimeter prime before. Why would you shoot a hummingbird with an 85 millimeter prime? Just because that's the lens that I had on me at the time. And it still works perfectly fine. It's a piece of glass and it absolutely works, but it wouldn't be what people would say is a birding lens by any means. So I don't think that there's any one necessarily application that you could use a 200 or a 500 for. But maybe if you're kind of doing some like long distance landscapes late at night, that might be kind of cool. I suggest you give it a try and find something cool that you come up with, but not one particular application. No.
All right. I want to thank Troy and the staff at Mike Crivello's for hosting our event here today. They're nice people there. We want to make sure we support our local camera dealers. So if there's anything that you need, contact Troy or contact Jeff at the store and they'll be able to help you out. They are doing curbside service. There are some specials going on Tamron lenses right now. There's instant savings on a lot of the lenses. They go up to as much as $200. There's also some specials that you get a free circular polarizer with certain lenses. This is a high-end, the highest end circular polarizer for some of the lenses. So just get in touch with them and they'll be able to help you out.
Thank you very much, Steve.
I do have a couple of last minute questions in there that I don't mind grabbing. Favorite lenses for nighttime photos. My favorite lenses, if I'm shooting full frame, are my 15 to 30 2.8, and then my 17 to 28, which I use on my Sony camera, which I think is awesome. There's also a 10 to 24 for crop censored cameras. That's really, really great. So I would look into those. But I think that was the last question that came through.
Can I throw one more to you just to be on the safe side here too?
Sure.
I know generally speaking, for this type of stuff, that there's the idea that we have to have f2.8 lenses. We have to have that fast glass. You just mentioned the 10 to 24. I think that's a 3.5/4.5 or so. Can somebody who's just sort of just beginning to get into this, can they get by with a variable aperture lens? Hello, are you there, Erica? Oh, heck. Well, hopefully her computer will catch up with us in a moment here. Erica? Sorry about the pause there, folks.
I think, is there a time limit since we
Um,
more
there,
than an hour?
well, there shouldn't be on this account, but that's just odd to me there. Oh, there she is.
She's back,
Yep,
or she's coming back.
there we go. Erica, did you hear the question I had for
No,
you?
I did. You
Oh,
started. Sorry, guys.
I'm sorry about that. Well, the question was, when people start out in this, f2.8 lenses might be it's a costly endeavor. Do you think people can do decent nighttime photography with the variable aperture zooms like that 10 to 24 that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think then your equation is just going to change. So instead of it being down at 2.8 and getting in that extra light through your aperture, you then have to get extra light through your ISO or through your shutter speed. So if you're still super wide, you might be able to go a little bit longer than 30 seconds, or you might need a little bit more than 3200 ISO. That also then depends on moonlight, right? So there are some times where you have a little bit of extra moonlight out that night, and you might only be at 800 ISO, and that's great. But there might be some other times where it's a really, really dark sky night, and you have to be at 3200 ISO. So if you can't be all the way down at 2.8, you might need to be at 6400 ISO, or I know some Sony cameras go to like 128,000 ISO. So you would just have to kind of rearrange your equation in that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you again.
And I also want to thank Tim here on our chat for saying that Ken was great this morning and better than me, because that's awesome, because Ken's my boss, so he's allowed to be better than me. So I appreciate you, Tim. But anyway, yeah, thank you guys for being here. I hope you're all safe and happy at home. I hope you pick something up, again, if anything, to be inspired to shoot something more. And I will catch you out on the road sometime soon. Okay?
Catch our next week. Mike Crivello's is having another one, same time. Same bat time, same bat channel, right?
Yes, we're going to have your rep, Janet, in to talk about macro photography, I believe.
Oh, Janet. Yep.
Really looking forward to that. So
yeah, so I hope you guys listen in to a lot of the seminars that are going on. My team is a team made up of 9 people who are really, really great. And Ken has done a wonderful job at putting us all together because we are completely different. And what's great about that is that we also teach very differently. So for one thing that I may teach better than somebody else may teach something better than I do. And that's one of the great things from learning from all different people and doing this now and spending the time while you have it, is that you get to pick up all of these different things that you didn't know could inspire you. So I definitely recommend listening into all of the other techs out there. I know Jillian, who does macro as well, she's like my macro guru. I was not a macro shooter at all before listening to her, and we could all be at the Grand Canyon, but she'd be shooting a rock. So definitely listen in to everybody that has stuff going on.
I know a lot of our people here are, fond of Instagram and stuff like that. What are the Tamron accounts that they should be aware of on Instagram if they're not already following them?
They are all listed on our Tamron website. If you go in and look up the tech team, all that information on all the social media handles for all the tech team are right there.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Steve.
All right.
Then I think we are good for the night. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming out. Feel free to leave us some feedback either at our Facebook page or Instagram or Twitter, whatever you like. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for your support for the local store. Thank you for your support of Tamron. They make some beautiful glass. And I hope to see all of you somewhere soon, even if it can't be in person. So thank you, everybody. And